I had all this stuff to uphold, like dad to your boys and husband to your wife and provider and paying for the house payment, and all that stuff just sat on my shoulders pretty squarely. And it's been pointed out to me that that's not just a male thing. There are women in the exact same boat that have the exact same responsibilities. That's not what I'm supposed to be. And one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was going through that is when I was talking to my pastor, and he told me to share it with my boys. And they were 10 and 7. I wasn't going to let them see that dad didn't have it all figured out. I didn't have it all figured out, and I was not in a great place. And for me and my house and my boys and my wife, we go to faith for that. That's where I went for the strength for it to get through it. And so for me, it was an opportunity to share with my boys that God's going to take care of this, and I'm not the one that's going to have it all figured out.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today's episode is brought to you by Exec HQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. Today, Jeff is interviewing Ken Bramble. Ken is an employee benefits consultant with Hub International. He has worked with clients in the employee benefits space for the last 25 years and has directly witnessed the shift into our current climate, where more employees are looking to their employers for help around serious issues like mental and financial health. He also is a mental health champion. His first book, Reflections at the Crossroads, A Journey of Ambition of Authenticity, is an insightful exploration of life's pivotal moments and the changes that shape our destinies. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Ken.
Ken, welcome to the Corporate Couch podcast this afternoon.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it, Jeff.
I always go back and see how I get introduced to the person I'm talking to. So Tim Holmes is actually the one that introduced us. And I met him through, I forget who introduced Tim and I, but he was in a job search after Hallmark. And I think I met him through that, and then he landed at E2E.
Yep, I recall that. Yep.
And then we actually met September 22nd, 2021. So it was about 1 month prior to you starting your journaling that became your book. So
that's exactly right.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. Excited to talk to you. A very interesting career. Your book, Reflections at the Crossroads, was just published. I was honored to be invited to your book event back in May, I believe.
In June. Yep.
June. That was close.
Yep. Appreciate you being there.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. But and I loved your vulnerability and your transparency in the book, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it. But let's start with your fun question. Even that people that know you fairly well, Ken, what one thing would surprise them about you?
Probably that I was like a theater kid, did productions of plays when I was in like elementary school time, but they weren't elementary school plays. They were like community theater type things. I was in the Music Man when I was in 6th grade, and my dad would come get me out of school early to go to practice, and none of the kids knew why I'd left early every day. And then nice. When we did the production, the entire 6th grade class came to see the production, and I had solos and all that stuff. I don't know if getting taller wrecked my voice or what, but it's not quite what it was when I was in 6th grade. So,
were you a triple threat, singing, dancing, and acting?
it's hard to give yourself that kind of credit, but I'll just say that I'm not afraid of any of the three. I'll put it that way.
All right. Now, do you do any type of, community theater
No,
today? No, I didn't think so.
no. I kind of worked my way over into, my dad was a very accomplished athlete, and I kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit, just playing ball sports when I was growing up. And then in my adult life, once I figured out I couldn't hit a curveball, I started messing around with endurance sports and triathlon and ultra running and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the curveball was the demise of my baseball career, as well as many others.
Yeah. Yeah. When the ball's coming straight at your head and you're supposed to just stand in there and wait for it to move, I
Right.
wasn't very good at that.
Yeah, that's funny. Did you grow up in Baltimore, I believe?
I did. I grew up
Yeah.
in Baltimore. Yep. Yep. The short version of the story is chased a girl to K-State who's not my wife. That's about as quick as I can tell that story. But yeah, I went to JUCO for a couple of years, decided I was going to rule the world without college, and started working and got a job, and realized that all the people in the corner offices were talking about where they did their grad work and all of that. And I probably better get my tail back in school. And so um, a friend of mine met a girl from Western Kansas, and I came out for the wedding and met the maid of honor, who was a K-State student, and kind of shipped off to Manhattan, Kansas. And a couple of relationships later, met my wife here in Kansas City, who's from Atlanta. So she's a transplant from Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
And we've been married next year 30 years.
That might be the best story of someone that has moved to Kansas City out of my 100+ interviews. I don't know.
Wow. Okay.
I'm always interested in people's. Did you have aspirations growing up of being something like, for me, it was I was going to be an NFL quarterback.
Sure.
Yeah, or something
Yeah.
like that. Did you have that and kind of have that kind of morph into you like, I don't need college to be successful?
No, I think as much as I'd love to give you, like a sexy answer if I was going to be a major league baseball player or something like that. I mean, I think as a kid, you always put yourself in those situations, right? And my wife gives me a hard time now about how I sign things, because it's a couple of letters and a couple of lines. There's not a whole lot of detail there. And I'm like, I've been practicing that since I was like 7 years old, because you knew you were going to get to the majors and you needed to have a signature ready
I
to
did
go.
the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm like, don't hate on my signature. It's taken a long time to get it to where it is today. I've been practicing that since I was a young boy. But no, I think it has more to do with just my surroundings. My dad, while he is, and I talk about it in the book, just the epitome of hard work and dedicated family man. I mean, he's alive today and paved a very good path on what it looks like to be a hardworking, devoted to your family man. He worked for Bethlehem Steel for 42 years. And I was the first one in my family to go to a 4-year school. Interestingly, I went to a technical high school. So when I was growing up, you could go to the regular public high school, but my two sisters before me went to this technical school, and they went for business. But you had to be accepted into the school, and it was a big deal to get in. And so because a lot of these kids wanted to learn a trade where they could go to work and not go to college, and that's the path I followed. And I got an electrical degree, or I graduated in electricity. Basically, that was my high school education. That was the trade I was learning. But because of that, I learned carpentry and plumbing and all kinds of stuff. So when it comes to finishing the basement in our first house, I did all that, and it taught me some really amazing life skills. Lucky for me, I got the handiness from my dad, so I'm already kind of built that way, but it gave me the awareness and understanding of how to wire the basement and do the plumbing in the bathroom and all that stuff. I told my wife when we finished the basement in our first house, I'm like, I'll do it all, but I'm not doing sheetrock. There's an art to that I don't want any parts of and don't have the patience for. But back to your point, I mean, it was more a product of just my surroundings. It wasn't a high priority in my area. I grew up in a very blue collar part of on the east side of Baltimore. And I was just kind of following the path that I saw around me. So.
Sure. Sure. So then you're at this wedding and you decide to, and at that time, enroll at K-State then?
No, so I was there. I was in Western Kansas for a week. It's kind of a funny story. I jumped on a plane, flew out to Kansas City, And my buddy picked me up at the airport and he goes, "Yeah, we got about 6 hours in the car." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
Wow.
I don't, I live in Baltimore. Like, we don't go 6 hours anywhere,
Yeah.
and like one of the high schools we played was around the Beltway and it was 45 minutes and we griped the whole way there that it was that far away. One of the high schools we played in soccer, we would pick up the water jugs and cut through the woods and be on their field from our high school. So when you pick me up and tell me we're going 6 hours, I was like, there's not a closer air. Like, what are we doing? So people always talk about going from Baltimore to Western Kansas, and I think it's just like a kid from Western Kansas going to Baltimore. Actually, I think the experience was just so different than anything I had ever seen or experienced. I thought it was really cool. I mean, no, I
Yeah.
wasn't moving to Western Kansas, but I visited there for a week. And the maid of honor is who I met that week. And we struck up a relationship and started doing the long distance thing. Those days where you get a long distance bill for hundreds of dollars and trying to figure out what in the world do I do now,
Yeah.
when long distance charges
Yeah,
were
you're
a
calling
thing.
on Sunday nights after
That's
5
that's
p.m. to get the
yep,
lower rates. Yeah.
that's exactly right. Yep. So we struck up a relationship and I kind of had it in the back of my mind that I needed to get away and go to school somewhere. I just wanted to get out of town and go basically have the college experience that I'd passed up on the first time around by just going to JUCO and then going to work. And I came out to Manhattan and to visit and make sure that the credits I did have would transfer properly. I had meetings set up on campus with advisors and all of that. And I got up on like a spring morning and walked across campus, and it was a Chamber of Commerce day. I mean, it was 58 degrees and the flowers are blooming. I'm like, well, this is exactly what I missed out on. So I was pretty much all in,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then just moved back home, or went back home after that visit and kind of got all my affairs in order and everything, and then just loaded up my car and moved out to Manhattan to finish school.
You graduated with a degree in marketing. Was that your
Yep.
initial major? Because a lot of people switch majors throughout their once they're
Well,
in
my
college.
initial major was accounting, and I
Okay.
just didn't, as bad as I wanted to, I just didn't. I consider myself to be kind of a numbers guy and,
Yeah.
pretty proficient when it comes to that. But the process of that, I could not get straight in my head. And I struggled with it greatly. And I switched over to marketing and then, got a sales job right out of college. Um, and messed around with a couple of outside sales positions for about 2 years. And my father-in-law was actually in the insurance business. He was an executive for a property and casualty carrier here in Kansas City. And he kind of gave me the directions of, you can sell widgets the rest of your life, or you can find an industry and begin to build a career within an industry. And I found a job working in the employee benefits space, working for a third party administrator, and actually kind of leveraged a little bit of that accounting experience that I had to jump into their accounting department just to kind of get my foot in the door, with the understanding that ultimately I wanted to get over to the client facing side. And, and marketing is a big word, but basically client facing is what I was seeking. And so I joined I joined that company in their accounting department. Basically, their accounting department was just billing their clients, but they were doing it on three-part forms.
Oh my God.
And that makes me sound really old, but more importantly, the company was just really behind. And so when they hired me, their supervisor and I got together and like, we've got to get them to give us a couple of PCs on the desk. And so we got together and kind of automated that whole function. And then I got recruited kind of to move over to the client facing account management side. That was my first job in the employee benefit space. It's the job that my team today has when we're serving our clients. So I'm very familiar with that role and what it looks like to serve clients at that level.
Interesting. I always like to hear how people actually got their first job post college. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was newspaper articles. I mean, ads. It was just do a couple of interviews on campus. And at that time, like the hot out of college job was go to work for Sherwin-Williams in their training program, at least at the in marketing level. I'm not talking about any other majors. I'm talking about coming out with a marketing degree, going to Sherwin-Williams with their training program, or going to work for one of the car rental agencies. Those were like two of the biggest jobs that were out there. And I ended up coming out of college and selling copiers. And that was another, it was kind of one of the three that was one of the hot jobs. And so banging on doors and coming home with 50 business cards in my pocket at the end of the day. And it taught me a lot of lessons, and it made me certainly a lot thicker skinned than I was going into it. But yeah, and there are people that make a lifelong career out of that, and good for them. But I did it for a couple of years and then jumped out and jumped into this employee benefit space that I've been in ever since.
Copiers, was it Xerox, Canon, or Ricoh?
It was Rico. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it was a company called Danka Business Systems that was based down in Florida,
Yeah.
but they had a big presence here in Kansas City.
Yeah, no, I love it. Love it. Yeah, you definitely got used to cold calling
Uh-huh.
and the good stuff, but it builds
Having
character.
receptionists throw your card away in front of you and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I got stories for days.
So yeah, I mean, I look at your career and it looks like you did a lot of things in the insurance industry. What I notice, like you'll take like, and I know titles are just so bad and they could mean a lot and they could mean
Sure.
nothing. But like you were account manager, regional manager, account executive, but then you were at, I think it was Marsh and McLennan,
Hmm.
big insurance, but you were
Yep.
VP of sales there. So that looked like it was your first big title. Talk about that progression.
Yeah, yeah. So, started out learning the business on the account management side, and then kind of made a progression into the production or sales side, if you will. And so Marsh was really my first sales producer role. Um, and it was a little bit different than, I mean, the activity was a little bit different than the producer role that I hold today. I mean, today I'm building a book of clients that I have personal and professional relationships with long term and all of that. At Marsh, it was more of a kind of kick the door down and move it on to someone to take it from there. So it really was more of just a sales role than it was kind of building a book of my own business. And we had a sales team there, and I kind of moved my way up to managing that team. I was there for about 5 years. Um, but yeah, it's you talking about looking at the experience. I mean, it used to be we'd beat ourselves up about having stops in our career, and oh well, he jumps around a lot or whatever. But then you get to the second half to fourth quarter of your career, and you look back and you're like, I've done some stuff that really pours into the experience that I have to offer today. I mean, I've worked, especially in the employee benefit space. I mean, you've got the client side, you've got which is the end user, you've got the broker side, which is kind of the middleman, you've got the insurance carrier side, which is obvious. And I've been at each one of those throughout the course of my career. And then a handful of years ago, I stepped away and purchased a business with a partner of mine that's kind of benefits adjacent. It's in the training space. And so I got to lay awake at night worrying about cash flow and owning my own business and dealing with all that comes with that. And so, when I'm talking to business owners now that are my clients, I've lived that part. So I have an understanding of what it's like to own your own business, be responsible for other people's livelihoods and all of that. So the diversity of my career has really served me well. It's not something it used to be we would get stressed out about job hopping and all of
Oh, I
that.
know. You know,
Now
I
it's served me well.
Yeah, I was definitely labeled that myself, and and it was very interesting because I'm a loyalist, but I just shit would happen to a company if I joined it
Yep.
or a division or whatever, like crazy
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, and and it's and now it's especially in the younger generations. I mean, they're not going to stay.
Right.
And I think we were really the first generation to kind of have multiple, not work for multiple companies, where it wasn't
Hmm.
as that's thus the term job hopper because it
Yep.
wasn't as frequent for sure. And it's
Right.
crazy. Even today, people hiring managers will look at people and not even maybe interview them or question because they only work 2 years at a company or 18 months or something like that.
Hmm.
I'm like, why? It's like crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they don't even know the story, right?
Hmm. That's right.
Yeah.
That's the key part to it. Absolutely.
And so I think the company you own was a Boer. Is it
Yep.
consulting? Yeah.
Yep.
So talk about that because it looked like I didn't know it was your company, but I saw it was in a global training.
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. A friend of mine who I met years ago through the sport of triathlon, we kind of sponsored a team together, and by sponsored I mean it was a faith-based triathlon team called Try for Him, and I was the first one to kind of be the captain of a team outside the state of Texas because that's where he started it. So that's where we met through just competing and racing in triathlon, and we'd always kind of dreamed that it'd be really cool if we could ever do something professionally together. It would be a lot of fun. And he called me and said, "Mom's selling her company. Do you want to buy it with me?" And I said, "Yeah, let's talk about that." And so his mom built that organization. She's an accomplished author and speaker, just wrote dozens and dozens of books on the topic of business communication skills, and built that company around speaking engagements and training materials and workshops and all of that. And she started it back in the oil and gas days in Houston. She was a teacher, had a friend that was at one of the oil and gas companies and said, "None of my engineers can write properly. Can you help me out?" And she started doing that, and that just launched this whole career. And so she was getting to the point where she was starting to think about winding it down, and he and I took that organization and made some change to it, and hopefully some improvement to it, and wrapped that up after about 5 years. But we had a really good fun time running that organization.
Yeah. And so what was your decision making process? Look like you moved from there to Hub,
Yeah, so I went through, after we wrapped that up, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And I'd kind of gotten this glimpse into this world of being an entrepreneur and owning your own company. And a lot of my career, I worked for very large organizations. And so I was really attracted to that life that we had for those 5 years we were doing that. And I just kind of opened my eyes to whatever was next. And I was trying to be patient about it. And lucky for me, I got introduced early on to a gentleman named Brad Douglas, who I'm sure you know. Brad sat me down in our first meeting when I told him that I was looking, and gave me literally a crash course on how to connect with your network and how to generate the activity to try and find out what your next role is going to be. I mean, he just laid it out on the table for me. And it's the reason that I enjoyed triathlon so much. I just follow a training plan. I just get up every morning and kind of take my medicine. And that's what I did. I just followed Brad's direction, made a list of 75 people and started making phone calls and asking for introductions. And over the course of 6 or 8 months, I had, about 4 different opportunities that were viable that I was exploring. And at the time, Hub International was an organization called Trust, which was a more local agency, which was the result of Kretcher Heartland and the Power Group merging together. The gentleman that was the president at the time was in a peer group, a professional executive peer group with me. And he's the one that started talking to me about coming to Trust at the time to join the benefits leadership team. And initially I was like, nah, I'm good. I left that industry 5 years ago. I did my own thing. I'm trying to keep my eyes open to something else. And quite honestly and literally, I just fell in love with this group of people after I got to meet a bunch of the people around here, and just felt really good about everybody that I spoke to and about the opportunity, and really at that point, had no aspirations of producing or being a producer or going into production or any of that. It was more so just loving on people and being a leader in the benefits side of things. And so that's how I joined the organization, was to be kind of a co-practice leader with a few other people that are on the leadership team here still today. And so I joined in that capacity. And then 2 years later, we were acquired by Hub. And the day we became Hub is the day that I became a producer and started building my business from 0 clients to today.
So and that was a conscious choice by you. It wasn't like a Hub dictate. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what
Yep.
led you to
Yeah.
that? I mean, you basically had to start from ground zero, right? I mean,
I did. And I mean, verbatim, what I said was, I'd love to explore the opportunity to do this, but I can't start at 0. We've got to figure something out. And fortunate enough for me, the organization was able to support kind of a transition into having clients and all of that. And that's worked out really well. But I got to know a bunch of the producer team here, and kind of saw how they ran their business and started to see some similarities in how I interact with people, how I would build a business if I were to, and started to see that some of the traits they had, I saw in me and thought I had the ability to do that. Heading toward the book, I mean, there's a approach that I had that I found to be a bit unique that I thought would be the proper way to go about it, as opposed to just the traditional standard way of producing employee benefits clients. And I very honestly just prayed about that and thought about it and decided to take that leap. And my business plan was have a coffee every single morning and pray really hard for provision.
Let's talk a little bit about the book. When I read it, so many good things in it, but talk a little bit. It looked like you were at, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, Aon Consulting. It looks like you took that job, and then that's when kind of your anxiety and imposter syndrome started, as you write about in the book. Go in detail a little bit about that and what was going on, and because I know you're a big mental health champion.
So I got recruited for a role to run a benefits practice in Kansas City. It was a big job, and I was working for a carrier and calling on the regional person that was doing the hiring, and they kind of recruited me for this role. And everybody that I talked to around me and the people that I trust all said it was the right next step for me and the proper progress in my career, and that I was ready for it. So I took that job, bought the big house, started a church plant with a group of people, and joined a nonprofit board all at the same time with two young boys at home that were 10 and 7. I just figured just like anything else, I'll figure it out. There were high expectations on me, and the pressure of that and this idea of imposter syndrome very literally just brought me to my knees. I mean, I had never experienced that kind of pressure or anxiety before. There's kind of a punchline of carrying a Target bag around in my overcoat in case I had to throw up on the way home from the office. I mean, it really destroyed me, and it was not something I had ever dealt with or felt before. And I hid it for a few months. And interestingly, my wife just finished her education and opened a mental health counseling practice. This is 12 years ago, and I thought I was being smart and hiding it from her. She knew something wasn't right, but I wasn't talking about it by any stretch. I was just trying to be dad to these boys and a husband to her. And so I kind of hid from it for a few months. And there's a big turning point, and I talk about it in the book, when I went to a industry breakfast. And it's the last place I wanted to be. I just wanted to hide. You walk into one of those breakfasts, and this is one of those places where the imposter syndrome really swells, because you're comparing yourself to everybody in the room. And all these people are people I've known from our industry for years. And everybody's smiling and catching up and shaking hands. And I'm just like looking around the room going, how come everybody else has this all figured out? And I'm such a mess, and I can't figure out how to get through this thing. And so we sat down, and they brought up the speaker, and the speaker was Ryan Lefevre from the Royals. And he's written his own book called Shame of Me, where he talks about we literally have shared experiences of sitting in our closet crying, and, at the end of a business day and stuff like that, trying to figure out why this black blanket is hanging over his head. And in my case, the same. And so all of a sudden, like, the most successful guy in the room is saying he's dealing with the same stuff I'm dealing with. This was 12 years ago. People weren't talking about mental health, and dudes certainly weren't talking about it. It was just a huge eye-opener for me that I wasn't the only one.
Today's podcast is brought to you by ExecHQ, a C-suite fractional firm providing elite executives for your business. If you're having challenges taking your business to the next level, if you want to augment your leadership team, or prepare your company for increased growth, profitability, and an eventual successful exit, we have seasoned executives from every C-suite position, ensuring a perfect fit for your needs and the dynamics of your industry. You will work with senior leaders who like to roll up their sleeves while checking their egos at the door. They can help your business in specific services such as strategic planning, executive leadership coaching, financial management, corporate governance, marketing, sales management, and many other advisory solutions vital to your business success. That's exechq.com. To learn more, go to exechq.com or email Jeff Palacio at jeff.palacio at exechq.com.
Flash forward when it came time to think about building a business and employee benefits, I decided that's the hill I was going to die on. God made me in a way where I just don't care about talking about it out loud. It's easier, obviously, to talk about it today than it was 12 years ago. I didn't want anyone to know what was going on then, but the climate has certainly changed. But I always say that I do it for two main reasons. One, if you think you're the only one that's going through this, you're not. And two, if you're a business leader or owner and you think your people aren't looking to you for resources around this stuff, you're wrong. And, the analogy I always draw is my dad working for Bethlehem Steel for 42 years. I'm pretty sure during his career, no one ever took him to lunch and said, tell me what you're passionate about, So, that wasn't part of the equation. And then you've got my son who's 21 now. My youngest son had just turned 21. And he was laying in bed during COVID with his laptop turned sideways under the blankets in class, in high school. That kid's going to come into the workforce with some different expectations than my dad did, And so you mentioned the term mental health champion. I mean, that's what I try and champion, is to let people know that that's what the people that are coming into the workforce today look like. Working in specific industries like the construction industry, where the suicide rate is 4 times that of the normal U.S. worker, and pointing out to folks that this is an issue and there are resources. And those resources don't have to be big, costly things. There's low cost and no cost options to provide resources to your people to help them through this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what the model ended up looking like.
No, it's just so interesting. And I mean, do you think you suffered more going through this because you're male, and it wasn't, there's things that, and I can't remember the name of the book, and you might know it, Terrence Mann, it's about male depression. It's underreported because males won't come out and say it. But if you look at other factors such as alcohol and drug abuse, so there's more women depressed based on the stats than men. Mm-hmm. But if you use depression stats, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, you aggregate those by male and female, it's about the same, because males have more drug issues, more alcohol issues. So it's just very interesting. And this is 2011-ish. So it's even then, it wasn't even talked about hardly.
Right. To that point, I just saw a headline yesterday about how the number of women taking leave of absence that can be attributed to depression is so much greater than that of men. And I was a little bit surprised by that, but especially 12 years ago, I had all this stuff to uphold, like dad to your boys and husband to your wife and provider and paying for the house payment, and all that stuff just sat on my shoulders pretty squarely. And I don't think it's been pointed out to me that that's not just a male thing. There are women in the exact same boat that have the exact same responsibilities. But for me, there was this, that's not what I'm supposed to be. And one of the best pieces of advice I got when I was going through that is when I was talking to my pastor, and he told me to share it with my boys. And, they were 10 and 7. I wasn't going to let them see that dad didn't have it all figured out. But I didn't have it all figured out, and I was not in a great place. And for me and my house and my boys and my wife, we go to faith for that. That's where I went for the strength for it to get through it. And so for me, it was an opportunity to share with my boys that God's going to take care of this, and I'm not the one that's going to have it all figured out. And I've used that multiple times in their lives, to share with them times where I was having a challenge or whatever. And that's where I took the challenge to gain strength to, figure it out or understand what was going on. So it's a really good piece of advice for me that I never would have come up with on my own, and was completely counterintuitive to what I wanted to do during that time.
When I read your book, and I mentioned this in my review, I'm definitely not, I'm a novice compared to your knowledge of the scriptures. And, we'll talk more about your book and how it's structured, but, it's obviously faith-based, and you go through a year of your challenges, the conflict of being, being a person of God versus, being a worldly success, and a material success in the world type thing. But what I liked about it is, I mean, you take us through a journey that a lot of people go through, and I put myself in that category, and I had to always reflect, like, I look at things and look at people. I'm like, and I'm an abundance person, and I believe that there's plenty for everyone. So it's not an envious thing, but I always want, like, why is that person have that, and I'm struggling to have it? And again, I'm not envious of that person.
Yep.
I'm happy for that person and their success and what they can afford and all that. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, you just wonder, that, and it's God's process or the universe, whatever you believe, but
Yep.
it really struck a chord with me, and it almost reads like a novel. You want to see what happens, and it just following.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about, obviously you know the book better than anyone. You wrote it, and I read it. But talk about what the book's like, and your process.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you for saying that it's made an impact for you, because, the whole project from day one was just the idea was that if it just helps one person to see that they're not the only one, then it was worth doing. So I've had great feedback from people that I know and love and care about that have gotten benefit from it, and that just feels good, and I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, so the idea was where the whole thing came from. So I spent 20 years competing in triathlon, getting up at 5 every morning and training for 3 sports. And at the end of 19, we lost my father-in-law to cancer, and we downsized our house to prepare for building this business from zero, and there's just a lot of change. And I kind of, for whatever reason, I just got over triathlon. I mean, I thought I'd do it till I was 100 years old, but people are like, "Oh, you burned out." Like, I didn't burn out. I got my fill. I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, and I'm all set. And so in 20, when COVID happened, all the races canceled. So that made it even easier to not do that. But I then started exploring some ultra running, like 50 milers and 50Ks and stuff like that. I've always been curious about that distance and doing one sport long. So I explored that a little bit and kind of got through that. And then I just decided I was going to start giving myself some rest and sleep past 5 a.m. and sleep till 7:30 and not schedule coffees till 8:30. And this is, the world, we all got introduced to that because of COVID. And so I took about a year of just kind of resting and letting my body repair after years of competing and training and all that. And then I've always been jealous of those guys that say, "Oh man, I get up in the morning and spend that time with God and it's so good for me." And I'm like, "Yeah, man, I'm on my bike for 2 hours. Like, I don't, and I heard somebody say drive-by devotion, like that's kind of how I would do it. I would squeeze it in here and there. And so I just decided I've always admired that and been envious of that. And so I decided I was going to start getting up at 5. And I had kind of a goal that I wanted to read through the Bible in a year, but I'm too obstinate to follow somebody's program. So I was just going to start in a spot and read as much or as little as I wanted to every day. It's a Monday to Friday practice for me. I don't do it on the weekends. I kind of get some rest on the weekends and play golf. But the act of doing that, getting up at 5 and spending that time doing 3 things: journaling, being in prayer, and reading through the Word. And so I just picked it up and picked a spot and started reading through. And 50 weeks later, I was complete reading the Word through. And it was with no program. It was just as little or as much as I wanted to each day. And I know the reason why it took me 50 weeks. It's pretty clear to me. The reading happened, and then there was just, I learned to just sit in silence and listen and, not always be doing. And that was really good for me. And then, like, the act of writing is just therapeutic for me. It just feels good to sit and write with a pen on a piece of paper. And in my senior year of high school, I wrote like chicken scratch, probably like that signature we were talking about earlier. Jimmy Hewlett, right next to me, my senior year of high school, used to print in all caps. And I was like, man, I'm going to start doing that. So ever since my senior year of high school, I started printing, and
Right.
that's still how I write. Like if you ask me to write something cursive, I have no idea even where to start. So I was writing this journal and at the same time reading and prayer and all that. And something happened a couple of times. There's a gentleman in town named Jason Terry that receives or that needs to receive credit because he's a fraternity brother of mine, a close friend. He's in a peer group with me. And every once in a while, like he and I would have coffee, and then 3 days later, I would be reading in the Word, and something would just click that we talked about, and I'd write about it, and then I'd snap a picture of it and text it to him and go, "Hey man, that thing we were talking about like showed up today. That thing that we were just talking about a few days ago." And I did that a couple of times. I would do it with a handful of people whenever it happened. And a couple of times with him, he was like, "You just need to get that thing out there. Like the stuff that you're writing is would be really helpful for someone else to see." He's the one that planted the seed with the idea of just publishing my journal. And from day one, there was something about the project that in my head, I just wanted my handwriting to be on the page. And so that was the initial idea. So the book actually, the way it sets up is the first couple of chapters or few chapters are just my story, the story we talked about from 12 years ago. I think you need to know that about me if you're going to read a very specific journal over the course of a year. And then at the end is a couple of things that I learned by going through that process. That's the graphic you were talking about earlier. That's one of those things. And so I just muddled my way through Amazon Publishing and got a template and got a hold of some people on Fiverr.com to do cover art and stuff like that. And that's kind of how it all came together. Now it's doors are being opened with opportunities to speak about it and share, just like Ryan Lefevre was to me. I'm getting the opportunity to kind of share my story and just speak to people and let them know they're not the only ones through that.
So what do you think for you, Ken, was the biggest change between the time you started writing the journal on October 26, 2021 to, I'm not going to say when you did the 50-week program, and I believe it was October 8th, 2022, but like maybe when the book was published. I mean, because obviously it's much easier to publish a book today than it was 10 years ago,
Sure.
but it's still, you did the work to publish a book. And, so talk about how Ken was different.
All this verbiage around publishing a book makes me so uncomfortable. Somebody calling me an author or somebody saying you wrote a book, like that was not the intention from day one. I had no thoughts of publishing this or putting it out there or writing a book or like all those things are not how I went into this time. This was completely an internal journey that I went on. It just so happened that when it was all complete, there was kind of something sitting there in front of me that people were telling me would be valuable for other people to see. Multiple people have given me the feedback that they're treating it as a devotional. So they're kind of going entry by entry, if you will. I had a very close friend of mine who had very good intentions when he said this. And I've told him he knows that this is the way this came out. So I'm not throwing him under the bus here. But he was talking about reading it, and you could tell he was kind of wound up and frustrated. He's a pretty passionate guy anyway. And there was a copy of it there because the third person in this conversation had just asked for a copy. And my friend grabs it and he goes, "For instance," and he just opens to a random page and there's a Bible verse and there's like 2 sentences after that. And that's all this entry is. And he reads the whole thing out loud. He goes, "I'm getting nothing out of this." And I was like, I don't think that's a compliment. Thank you. I don't know what we're trying to do here. What he was trying to say is, if you read through the journal like you read a book, like gonna get in bed, read 15, 20 pages or whatever tonight, like that entry that he read took me probably 90 minutes to 2 hours to develop because I read a verse, I probably thought about it or prayed about it, and then I wrote a couple of thoughts about it. And so I've had a lot of people tell me that they're treating it as a devotional because each one of these entries is kind of some time to just stop and reflect and think, and what does it mean to me? And I see what it meant to him or whatever, as opposed to just blowing through a story. There's not really an arc to the story so much as this each entry is kind of its own standalone idea, if you will.
It's like that hero's journey you're taking in the journal in terms of,
Yeah.
the kind of that, the not going to say it's like man's search for meaning, but it's man's search for, resolution between, having stuff and being a person of God and faith, which is, and you can sense your struggle. I mean, right?
Yep, it's a very good point. I mean, I tell people that all the time. Like, there are challenges throughout the course of the year where I'm dealing with anxiety and dealing with just day-to-day struggles or whatever. But in general terms, I was 2 years into building a business that for most people takes 3 to 5 years to get up and going. And so, there's impatience, there's looking around at those around me that are successful and have done it for 20 plus years, and comparison and imposter syndrome and all that ugliness. And I tell people it's not a pretty story. Like, it's me being angry that I didn't get the big deal this year and I've got to maybe wait another year or two until they're ready to work with us or whatever. And I was brought up in a very conservative Baptist home where you weren't supposed to care about stuff. But I'm kind of over apologizing for that. Like, God made me that way. Stuff gets my eyes. I just have to be very careful about letting it rule my day-to-day world and my drive. And that's where the challenge comes in, because I think he's put me here to share this story and to pour into others, and not to amass, wealth and things and all of that. And that's what the book is about. It's that daily ugly challenge of trying to be the man of God I think he wants me to be versus chasing all the stuff.
No, and no, again, it's just so interesting because you're so transparent about it in terms of, putting it out there, where I don't think, well, and maybe there's no book if you didn't put it out there, right? But,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's so interesting to me. And my question wasn't about like, you were wanting to be an author. I was just say, how did you change between, when you started the journaling on October 26th,
That's the final two chapters, right? That's what I learned. And I can tell you that, I can confidently say I am a much different person in 2024 than I was in 2021. And a lot of that it comes from the growth and, the work, if you will, of pouring into those pages and spending time in the Word and in prayer. And, not to say that I don't still have the same struggle every single day, but I'm certainly more confident in who I am and what I'm here to do than I was 3 years ago. You see me talk about the cool kids in the book probably a lot. And that's just the group of successful colleagues of mine that, have done it and are proven. And all you want when you're, I'm not young, but when you're young in that stage of your effort, all you want is to be accepted and for people to know that you can actually do it. I spent a lot of time praying and wishing and thinking about being one of the cool kids. And then you get all the way through it and you get a lot more confident in just who you are. And that becomes less of a priority for you. And that's where probably the biggest growth has come from for me in going through that process.
And I love part of your summary. You came up with using emojis. The 4 stages of satisfaction, and you basically said, the one that people need to be. I would think you would say is that content. Stage 3. You're happy with the present state, but you have. I think you call it controlled ambition, which is great. Like be thankful for the moment, the present, and be in the present. But it doesn't mean you can't have ambition, and you use controlled ambition, which I really like, to move forward.
Yeah.
So
that phrase is the most important thing on that page to me, to my personal journey and my personal thing. I just kind of realized, and I can't recall if I introduced that concept this way, but I just realized that one day I was going to wake up and be very close to the end and looking back and going, I was never satisfied. I was never happy. And you hear about it. People, you hear about uber entertainers or athletes or whatever that get to the mountaintop and then go, what's next? And we all have our own mountaintops in front of us. Like, it doesn't have to be a Super Bowl. It can be a successful business, or it can be, anything. Be getting a car. It can be anything that you're looking forward to. I've taught myself over the recent years anyway, that when I have a big vacation I'm looking forward to, as I'm approaching it, I start looking at the 2 or 3 weeks ahead of that and past it. and start looking at stuff to look forward to there. So then I'll come back from this really great trip that I've been looking forward to, and it's just a big letdown to get back to my, normal, in quotes, daily life. The idea of reaching that mountaintop,
Right.
whether it's a trip or a car or whatever it is, and then the big letdown on the other side, like we hear about it all the time from athletes and entertainers and uber successful
I call when you come back from a vacation, how long does the vacation afterglow last? Once you re-enter back into
right.
the professional orbit.
I understand.
The book was published in May, June timeframe of 2024. What have you taken, outside of the book to help people that are dealing with this anxiety, imposter syndrome, the chase for the new car or the huge vacation home?
Just like I said, I hate to repeat it multiple times, but just like when Ryan Lefevre stood in front of the room and told his story, I mean, that's the way that I can have an impact on people. And whether that's a men's group at a church, or whether it's a professional group, or whether it's a group of HR professionals, or, whatever that looks like, if God gave me one thing, he gave me this ability to be transparent and open about it. I'm not shy about talking about it, mainly because I've seen the impact personally of what happens when someone says it out loud. And so, if there's anyone out there that thinks that there's a group of people or a person that would benefit from hearing my own journey and, what that's looked like, then reach out to me. I'm absolutely here
what's
for it.
The best way to get a hold of you?
So you can email me at ken.bramble@hubinternational.com.
Okay, and we'll put that in the podcast description so that people will have it there.
Wonderful.
Ken, I love great leaders like yourself giving advice to two groups of people. One is that recent college graduate. So if you can think back to your K-State Wildcat graduation, and you're going out for that first job, what advice would you have for them as they begin their professional journey and getting that first job?
Well, my advice is probably not the most popular thing, but I'll just tell you that one of the statements that I just despise is fake it till you make it. That's what put me into that spin. And so, when we bought our company with my partner, we both took personality tests, and it just so happened they fit really well together. But I also recall sitting down with him and saying, here's what I think I'm pretty good at. Here's what I think I probably am not that great at and is not a strength of mine. And I was just very transparent. Now, I did that because I had gotten wrecked by not doing that in the previous effort. But, for a college student specifically, I would say be genuine about who you are. That, if you're literally just coming out of college, no one's going to expect you to have this amazing resume and capability and all. They already know that you're just coming out of education, that you don't have, if you have internship experience and all of that, that's great. But this idea of trying to fake it till you make it, and some people can do that. They can live behind that thing and be very successful, and that's great. But speaking from a guy that can't do that and got leveled by it, that's just kind of, my thoughts.
No, I love that. The second group is that group that wants to continue their career by moving from an individual contributor to a manager and getting that first promotion where you're responsible for a team of people. What advice would you have them as they begin their leadership journey?
I told you I have coffees pretty much every morning, and I get to do that. I get to meet new people every day, and it feeds me and it gives me energy. And I think we've already proven I'm not shy. I can talk, just as long as anybody else. And so you go into those coffees, and it's really easy to get sucked into being the first one to talk and talking too much and using too many words and all that stuff. And so I kind of started programming my mind to not do that and to do more listening as opposed to talking. And I just put it into one little statement, and that is to be a servant, not a consumer. And so I would say for that leader or that potential leader, yeah, you want to further your career and you want that for you, but it's been proven over and over and over again that giving is what helps those things happen. And so I would say looking for opportunities for those around you to serve them is probably what's going to help elevate you and show those around you, to give you confidence or to put confidence in you and see you as a leader. It's kind of the talented high school quarterback guy. Like everybody wants to hang out with him, and it's the ones that like do all the right things, not the cocky jerk high school quarterback, but the one that like cares about the least of these and the kid that's not getting any attention. Like that's so attractive to the people around him, not only the kids, but the parents. And so I would say approach your interaction with your colleagues and your leadership as being a servant and not a consumer, and that'll attract people and get you there without so much
Yeah,
intention.
I love that. Ken, thanks so much. It's so great seeing you again. You're a gift to Kansas City and beyond. You're just one of the good people out there. So I really appreciate you and grateful I know you.
Well, those are very kind words. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Ken is such a great person. I mean, I've had coffee with him. I don't know how many times, but he's just a true, authentic person. And while I couldn't relate to his book from I have no, not I wouldn't say no knowledge of scripture, but not obviously as well versed as Ken. But I definitely related to his struggle, just from a kind of being the primary wage earner and having that responsibility and things like that. But this is the things he did at Hub. His current company. He was on the client side, basically the client facing side. Then 2 years in, he decides to be a producer, and that's a hard business. Like he says during the episode, it takes 3 to 5 years to be successful, and and he's very transparent of the difficulty he had just being with his successful peers, and basically being angry at their success, or not at their success so much as why can't I have that same success. So his book is phenomenal in that way, for me. And I just love how he summed up where he needed to be. Kind of he had this 4 stages of satisfaction in the book, and he really wanted to be best stage is stage 3, where you're happy with the present state, yet you have controlled ambition, right? So it's gotta, hey, this is where God has put me right now. I'm gonna be happy with that, and because I'm grateful, but I still have a want to have better. And I thought and he was in that 4th stage, which was basically anger, right? Just pissed at
Mm-hmm.
everything going on. And I'm putting it probably over exaggerating that, but and he had done sales before, obviously, but when he was at Hub and he got this producer role, because literally those producer roles, you start at zero. So he negotiated, because he had been there 2 years, to give him some kind of income. His business plan when he became a producer was having coffee every morning with someone and praying for provisions or something like that, which I thought was interesting. He's just a servant leader, and he focuses, he's very transparent and speaks to groups on, mental health in the workplace. So he's a really gift to Kansas City and all his clients and all the people he speaks in front of. But what did you take out of the episode, Joe?
Man, I started out the episode thinking it was going to be an episode about HR regulations and that kind of stuff, and I kind of had my mind prepared for that. And it took this turn about halfway through to talk about mental health issues in men, and that's what the episode was ultimately driving toward in the book that he wrote about that. And I think that's a fascinating subject. One of the things that does, the study of that subject of mental health in men, is it proves, as if you need proof of it, but it proves that men and women are different from each other. They approach problems differently. They think different. They're wired differently, and they deserve to be treated differently. And you would think that in this age that you don't have to be reminded of that all the time, but you do. The approach for treating men with mental illness is different than how it is in treating women for mental illness, and I think that's a fascinating subject to go by. I just thoroughly enjoyed the entire interview. He just seems like a wonderful guy to get to know, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to listen to the interview.
And you probably can relate to his triathlete experience and his ultra marathons.
Yeah, right. I'm the world's greatest triathlete. I am a tub of lard, and you know that. But I did get probably more of the scripture references than what
Oh,
he
yeah,
than
that's a
what
low
you
bar.
did.
That's a low bar. Yeah.
That's a low bar to go under, but I was able to understand that.
Joe, what pearls of wisdom do you have for our audience today for leadership?
Today we are going to go to that great philosopher George Bernard Shaw. And one time he wrote this. He wrote, "The biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.